Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us for this conversation with co-writers and co-directors Elle-Máijá Tailfeathers and Kathleen Hepburn of the film The Body Remembers When the World Broke Open as part of the Embodied Arts Festival hosted by Oyoun, Berlin. I'm so honored and grateful that they could join us today from Canada. And I hope all the participants who have joined us in this conversation had a chance to watch this brilliant, poignant, and urgent film that was online yesterday. My name is Sana, and I have curated the film program for the festival. Before diving into the conversation with the filmmakers, I would like to give you a bit of a background into the concept for the film program titled The Body Undone, A Conversation with Loss. I began my reflections on embodied memories inspired by the poetry of Meena Kandasamy, the writings of Christina Crosby, and the art of Balbir Krishnan, looking specifically at the emotions of loss and grief. Their work, along with the 7 selected films in this program, helped me map new areas of inquiry on the workings of loss and pose questions away from a more conventional outlook on the linear notions of loss's predestined path, especially in a culture today that's frantic for resolution. The film program continues to be a journey of self-reflection for me, starting from scratch on what embodiment and memory means to me outside of inherited ideas, and to discern for myself what embodied memory feels like in my own body. It has not been an easy process, but I'm grateful that through the research done and the topics and the films that I have watched over the last months, I was better able to hold space and listen to the emotions that came up for me during this process. Instead of looking at loss as holding social, political, and aesthetic implications for the body, a loss that doesn't rely on linearity, but that is profoundly intimate from the deep space and time of the self, one that is birthed from the deepest parts of our bodies and times. Moreover, from this position of embodied knowing, I wondered whether re-engaging with loss could generate sites for memory and history, rewriting of the past and reimagining of the future. And could this engagement with loss, the irrecoverable, paradoxically become the condition of a new anti-colonial hope and agency? Focusing on storytelling from new voices, especially those of women, the films look at various loss held by different bodies and hopefully allows the viewers to meditate on the idea of loss being inseparable from what remains. This conversation today is being streamed live via Oyoun's YouTube, Facebook, and Vimeo channels. Thank you to all the participants who are joining us on the various platforms. If you have any questions for the filmmakers, please let us know either via the chat on the streaming platforms, or if you're in Zoom, just raise your hand at the end of this conversation and we'll give you a chance to speak to the directors. If you haven't seen the film, The Body Remembers When the World Broke Open is about 2 Indigenous women from vastly different backgrounds that find their worlds colliding on an East Vancouver sidewalk as one of them is fleeing a domestic attack. As this intimate yet challenging encounter develops, what began as violent and terrifying escape tentatively expands as the woman's shared imagery and cultural experience weaves a fragile bond between them. Both women must now face their own unique struggle as they navigate the complexities of motherhood, class, race, and the ongoing legacy of colonialism. The film is also very much a universal story, one that illustrates that for women, the personal is always political. Our minds, bodies, and spirits must constantly navigate through an often toxic, hostile, and unsafe world. The Body Remembers When the World Broke Open is original storytelling at its best and a catalyst for reimagination of authentic representation in cinema. It's a story that gives a voice to a variety of Indigenous groups, many of whom have been overlooked despite endlessly advocating for the end of violence in their communities, especially against women. I would like to introduce both my guests, starting with Elle-Máijá Tailfeathers, who is a filmmaker, writer, and actor based in Vancouver, British Columbia. She is Blackfoot from the Kanai First Nation Blood Reserve, as well as Sami from Northern Norway. She holds a bachelor's degree from the University of British Columbia in Indigenous Studies with a minor in Women and Gender Studies. Elle-Máijá was a 2018 Sundance Institute Mirata Mita Film Fellow and is an alumni of Berlinale Talents. The Body Remembers When the World Broke Open is her debut narrative feature. My other guest, co-writer and co-director of the film, Kathleen Hepburn, is a Vancouver-born writer and director whose critically acclaimed debut feature, Never Steady, Never Still, premiered at TIFF in 2017 and was awarded Best Canadian Film and Best Director by the Vancouver Film Critics Circle, as well as a special jury prize at the Dublin International Film Festival. She holds an MFA in creative writing and a BFA in film production from the Universities of Guelph and Simon Fraser, respectively. The Body Remembers When the World Broke Open is her second feature film. Thank you so much, ladies, for joining us. And before we start this conversation, could the Oyoun team just show the trailer of the movie to set the tone for the conversation?
Do you know that guy? It's my boyfriend. Come on, honey. Rosie! Let's move a little faster, okay? He's not usually like that. He doesn't even mean it mostly. He can be good too. You're a long ways from home then. I told you I don't want any calls.
I would just feel better if we could call someone, you know? Call someone who knows about this kind of stuff. It's a lot, hey? Being a mom. So you got anybody looking out for you, Rosie?
I look out for myself.
And the baby?
You think you're better than me? You're not fucking better than me. I'm gonna protect him. No one's taking my baby.
I'm not trying to tell you what to do.
Then what are you trying to do?
I'm just trying to help.
I love you so. You'll always be mommy's little guy.
So thank you both for joining us. I think I want to start off about the title of this film. The two main characters in this film come from very different backgrounds, but they have this inherited legacy of colonialism, which is violent in many ways and impacts them every day. But they're also beautiful, strong, resilient women. The title really speaks strongly to the film and the lived experiences of this woman, but also to the festival that we're having right now. Could either of you tell us where this title comes from and what it meant to you and how it resonated with you?
Well, thank you for having us. It's really nice to be here in this strange virtual space. The film title came from an essay by Billy Ray Belcourt. He's a Cree poet and scholar, and he wrote an essay in Arts Everywhere magazine, which can be found online. An essay is of the same title, The Body Remembers When the World Broke Open. And in the essay, he speaks about a lot of things, but in particular, it's a response to Tanya Lukin Linklater's video work called In Memoriam. And he speaks about the ways in which we as Indigenous people have inherited this violent colonial legacy, and the ways in which this legacy is ongoing. Colonialism is still very much a thing in Canada. It's very much alive, and continues to impact us in various ways on a daily basis. But he speaks to the ways that that this legacy and this ongoing colonialism are embodied. And yeah, it's a beautiful essay. I encourage readers or viewers to go and read it, because it's it's much better to read it than to hear me talk about it. But that's where the title came from.
And what was it about the essay mistaken, where says, it even if we don't want to think about the past, it is within us, or something on those terms, and we might not get this big decolonial world that we want. And I wonder almost if Belcourt, sorry, so past present reference is what Isla and Rosie are dealing with, in a sense.
Yeah, I would definitely say so. In Canada, we had the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, which was, I guess, an effort to speak truth and uncover truth about the history of the residential school legacy. So for viewers who are on the other side of the world right now, in Canada, we had the Indian residential school system, wherein all Indigenous children were forced to go to residential schools, which were part of a larger assimilationist project. And many of these children experienced violence in all forms. Many children died in these schools, and the effects of those schools are still being felt today. And the Truth and Reconciliation Commission was, I guess, a move to reconcile, although I don't know if that's ever really possible, especially when colonialism is very much alive. And I think that's what the essay is also about. It's about how there's, I guess, a pressure on Indigenous people and Indigenous artists to make work that is that speaks to a present where everything has been reconciled, but that's just dishonest. And I think when you opened this event, you spoke about how we live in a society that's frantic for resolution, and I think that can be said about the Canadian society we live in, wherein there is this like frantic push for resolution, for everything to be okay, without acknowledging the current harms that are being placed on Indigenous people and many other marginalized populations in Canada, because white supremacy is very much alive in all institutions within Canada.
Yeah, but beautifully, you've also shown that these characters are more than just the trauma that they hold. And of course, they hold a lot of trauma based on their colonial legacy. Could you speak a bit about what the film shows in regards to how women have been affected by this history of state violence? Mothers, you've talked a lot about foster care within your film as well. Could you kind of lay the ground for us on what is happening in Canada in relation to that? I remember reading a crazy statistic. I think you said like 91% of young Indigenous children are within foster care, or some bizarre number like that. It sounded extremely violent.
Yeah, sure. So the legacy of child removal is ongoing in Canada. So after the residential schools were shut down, something called the 60s scoop happened, and it never really ended. So the 60s scoop was this government effort to continue to remove Indigenous children from communities and place them in the foster care system, or to have them adopted by non-Indigenous families. And that is an ongoing issue. Indigenous children are being removed from family and community at extremely high rates, very disproportionate to the population. And the numbers vary from province to province, but in the province of Manitoba, 91% of children, actually I think it's more than that, over 90% of children who are in foster care in the province of Manitoba are Indigenous children. And that removal process has done irreparable harm to our communities and to our families, to our culture, to our languages, to nationhood, to our sovereignty, to all of those things. And we wanted to speak to that in terms of what it means for motherhood and family and culture and community, because I think it's been a very violent effort by colonial bodies to fracture Indigenous families, because I think nationhood is rooted in the strength of family and community and motherhood, and the ways that Indigenous women have been traditionally upheld as in positions of power within our communities. So there's been active efforts to disempower Indigenous women and family, and so that has been done through the residential school system and through the foster care system. And in this film, we wanted to speak about that. We wanted to speak about Indigenous motherhood and sovereignty of the body, and what does that mean on an individual level through this particular story. So yeah, I'm kind of losing my train of thought.
It's okay. It's a lot to chew on. Kathleen, do you have anything to add as sort of a non-native? I don't know how you have experienced all these topics and the film in itself.
Yeah, I mean, I think just obviously it's been a huge learning experience for me as someone who's a settler on these lands. But I think in terms of bringing it into the story and what we were trying to do with it, I think that's a big part of Isla's journey throughout the film, is that she comes with a certain amount of privilege and education through a sort of colonized system of education. And when she first meets Rosie, her perception of her as a mother is, this person is very young and she, is too young to be a mother. But I think over the course of the film, she comes to sort of understand that Rosie has a right to choose to be a mom, and that she's going to be a good mom. And I think as a society, we have this sort of bias in terms of what we believe makes a good mother, which is someone who is like financially stable and, has a job or lives with a partner who has a job and can provide this sort of steady life. But I think what we forget sometimes is like the most important thing that a child needs is love, and that sort of unconditional love and presence from a mother. And so, as Maya said, thinking about that in relation to Indigenous women just makes it that much more complex because of this history and present fracturing of families.
Yeah, and coming back to the film, is it true that it was based on a real life experience that you had, Elle-Máijá? And could you share with us what happened?
Yeah, sure. So yeah, the film is inspired by an experience that I had in the same place where we shot the film, and it's also the same neighborhood that both Kathleen and I live in. And we fictionalized what happened, obviously, because we wanted to not replicate extractive forms of filmmaking by taking a story that didn't necessarily belong to us as storytellers. But very much like in the film, I encountered a young Indigenous woman who had just fled her partner, who had assaulted her, and she was standing on the sidewalk barefoot in the rain on a really cold Vancouver day, and she was clearly in distress, and it was a busy kind of rush hour, a moment of like busy rush hour traffic on the street, and nobody was stopping for her. And so I ended up taking her home with me. She didn't want to go to the hospital or to the police, and I took her home with me. And I think, like Isla, I was very naive in the sense that I thought, because I, have and benefit from various forms of privilege. I'm middle class, and I'm university educated, and I benefit from light skin privilege. For all of those reasons, I live comfortably for the most part, and I experience racism in a very different way than someone like Rosie in the film would. And so for all of those reasons, I thought that I was capable of helping this young woman, of maybe solving her problem, which is just so naive. And she ended up going home after I took her to a safe house. She ended up going home, very much like in the film. And so I carried that experience with me for years. I never saw her again, and her building is just 2 blocks away from my home. And I just always kind of wondered, like, what happened to her and what happened to her child, and what did that experience mean, and what can I do with it? Because it felt like it was just sort of like sitting with me unresolved, which is interesting because we're talking about this frantic rush for resolution, but it sat within me unresolved, and I felt like maybe in turning it into a film, there could be an opportunity for resolution, or just to document that it happened and continues to happen every day to so many women. So yeah, that's where it came from.
Yeah, because your film, I mean, is not really about any resolution. Like there is no ending that's happy, that offers the viewer like some massive catharsis at the end, which I think is very honest. And that's the way most of these emotions, I guess, evolve. Even during my own processing of loss and grief and trauma, it's never from point A to point B. It's so circular somehow and messy. And I think that's why your film is so beautiful, because you showcase that messiness and untidiness of all these emotions so really and so honestly, that a lot of us are sitting there might not have gone through the same experience, but saying, oh yes, I can relate and I understand and I feel seen and heard through films like this. So thank you for that. How was the process? I mean, you're acting in it, but you both have also co-directed and written it. The production of a film like this, which is a very difficult topics again, how did you go about making the film with a larger cast and crew involved to be in a holistic way? Could you touch a bit about what the prep was like, for the research was like for this kind of film? Kathleen, maybe?
Sure. Yeah, so it was a really ambitious project. I'm not sure if everyone has seen the film, but we made the choice to tell the film in one continuous take after the 2 characters meet, which sort of meant we were more producing a play in a sense, where everybody had to be there for the entire experience for each take. So we shot the film. We had 2 days of sort of more traditional shooting for the sort of prologue scenes. And then we had 5 days where we shot the film once a day for an hour and a half, and that was sort of it. So it was hugely complicated just in terms of logistics of having the crew there and getting, from location to location, because we had, I think, six or seven locations. So what we ended up doing was having a very, very extensive rehearsal process, at which point, Elle-Máijá and I were able to make a lot of the choices we would normally have made, on set, if we were shooting in a more traditional way. So we had 4 weeks of rehearsal with just cast, and then we had a week of rehearsal with the entire crew, where we sort of went on location and went through and choreographed every move, because we had to have predetermined points, because to complicate it even further, we were shooting on film, which meant each mag only had 11 minutes. So we had 12 predetermined stitch points where our cinematographer was handed a second camera pre-rolling. So he could continue and the actors could continue almost seamlessly, and we could just carry on. So yeah, that's sort of a taste of how much of a moving, how many moving parts there were, I guess, in terms of pulling it off. But your question was about holistic.
Yeah, I think I was more trying to, more than the technical, like the sensitizing of, you know, the entire cast and crew to actually what was going on. Also these kind of topics. And yeah, I think I read that there was a lot of workshops involved with youth from Vancouver, Indigenous youth, to talk about foster care and their experiences. Could you maybe go through that like pre-filming process a bit with us?
Sorry, I got caught up in
No worries. We're very excited about the tech part, and I'll get to that because I think it's very important to also talk about that.
But yeah, so from the very beginning, I think because neither of us, has been through the foster care system, we didn't have that experience. So we thought it was really important to speak to some young women who had. So we did a script workshop with, I think we had 6 or so young women who'd been through the system, and we did a table read with them, and they gave us feedback on the dialogue, and that was a really amazing experience. We also had, because we sort of came to a point where we when we started to crew up, we felt like we weren't finding enough Indigenous crew. We wanted to have as many Indigenous crew as possible on this shoot, but because everyone is very busy and there's sort of a lack of capacity in the technical side of that, we decided to sort of build this mentorship program where we had 11 mentees who were with us from the beginning till the end of production. And so because of that, I think it was really important for us to set a tone on set that was very safe and sort of welcomed everyone in. So one of the things we did at the beginning was we had sort of a mini cultural competency. I know mine doesn't like that word, but that's sort of the only word we found for it, where we went through sort of a workshop with a law student who went through a mini sort of history sort of Canadian colonial history, and sort of set the tone for all the non-Indigenous crew, but also the Indigenous crew were there and were able to, it sort of opened a conversation, I guess, for the crew members to understand where the story is coming from and what the sort of intention was behind the work.
Yeah, that was my question, but thank you. Elle-Máijá, do you feel like you acted out your own lived experience, or how much of you is sort of in the character you played on screen?
Well, she's certainly like a heightened version of me, I guess. I don't think I'm that bougie or uptight, but it was important to have extremes with these 2 characters. Yeah, it was definitely strange to in a way reenact that experience, but it also felt cathartic just documenting it in this film and knowing that others would be able to sit with the same experience and maybe learn the same types of things that I learned, and also kind of have to navigate those really challenging questions that arise around the intersections of class and race and how that impacts gender and the ways that all of that is embodied, and how we navigate violence and what happens after the violence. And also, navigating structural and systemic violence, which are just always there and so pervasive.
How did you find Violet Nelson, who plays the character of Rosie? She was incredible. How did she come to be part of this?
So we did an open casting call. We had sort of more traditional casting as well, but we weren't finding, we just knew we needed something really special for this character, and we did an open call, and she came in. She'd never acted before, but she auditioned thanks to her mother's encouragement, and yeah, it was, we knew pretty much right away, I think, that there was something really amazing about this person.
Yeah, and I don't know, she embodies that character so beautifully, and I keep wondering, and now that we go into the technical bit, how she handled as a first time actress these continuous shots that even as a viewer you're so emotionally drained, and you guys didn't give us any space to breathe or look away, or yeah, we're completely immersed constantly. So talk about kind of the camera work for the participants who didn't watch the film. I think the real power of your film lies in this intimacy and realism that you were able to bring in with your cinematographer, Norm Lee, who shot on 16 mm, like you said, a continuous shot, is not the prologue scenes, the 3 prologue scenes, but the rest were all continuous in real time. And you said you circumvented the 11-minute long 16 mm magazines by constantly changing cameras. Is that correct? Is that how you did it? They were already like loaded and ready to go. Why this style, Kathleen? I mean, you mentioned complicated. I mean, it's elegant, it's beautiful, it's stunning, but it's extremely complicated. Why was it important to do this for you guys?
Well, right from when Maya had originally been thinking about the film, and she could speak to this a little better than I could, but she had sort of imagined it as a real-time film because the experience was so temporary. And so it was important for us to try and honor that experience of 2 strangers sort of coming together for a moment and never really seeing each other again. And we thought, okay, we have to tell this in real time, and what's the best way to really immerse ourselves in the real time is to actually shoot it in real time. So we knew it was a little crazy when we started, and we kind of had to rethink our whole conception of how to make a film and what that looks like. And I think for me, what really drew me to this idea was bringing the audience, like you said, into this experience where you don't have a break, and you're never really sure when it's going to end or how it's going to end. And I think if we had cuts and wide shots and close-ups and stuff, you would have all these moments where you could like breathe and release this tension. But without that, you're really there with them.
Yeah, how was it for you as acting in the film, Elle-Máijá? Like, tell us a bit about this continuous action of filming and the emotional trajectory for the characters. I mean, I'm sure you didn't get it. Oh, it was wonderful.
Yeah. Well, because in film, the way that it's conventionally shot is, completely out of chronological order. A feature-length film generally is not shot in any less than 3 or 4 weeks, usually 5 or 6 or more if it's a big film. And so we were really inspired by the process of theater, of having a long rehearsal process, and then also being able to have the entire performance go from beginning to end in one continuous action. I really love theater for that reason, because, once you go, there's no stopping. You can't like stop and redo a scene over again or anything like that. And there's a certain energy that builds as well with the audience, and having to sit with all of that in one continuous go. And so it was such a luxury to have 4 weeks of rehearsal with Violet. And so it was just Kathleen and I and Violet, and sometimes our directing mentee, Jade Baxter. We all just, worked together in a rehearsal space for 4 weeks. And it was such a luxury to be able to go through every single beat of the script and think about what are we trying to say here, and what does this mean, and building a relationship with Violet and building trust and all of that was so important. And also just like working through the really challenging aspects of the story with Violet, because she's had lived experiences really similar to that of Rosie's, and she speaks about it publicly. And so Kathleen and I went and saw a therapist to learn about trauma-informed care and how to take care of a 17-year-old girl acting for the first time with this like incredibly challenging subject matter, and how we as directors could hold that responsibility in an ethical and caring way. So yeah, it was wonderful to be able to rehearse for 4 weeks and then experience the entire story from beginning to end as an actor. It was obviously really complicated, but to be honest, there's so much of that in theater. You have to, it's just this like carefully choreographed show where like every single moment has to be prepared and planned, and things can go wrong, and there's some real like beauty to the potential of failure as well.
Yeah, I think I read that normally said it has never been done in the history of film on 16 mm film, this kind of continuous real-time shoot. So it's a first of many kinds, your film, first of many things. What it also shines in your movie is, the treatment of temporality and how you've allowed for these spaces and moments between the words to just be there. And I think this also comes with the kind of visual treatment you've given through the camera, which gave us as the viewer, me especially, I felt a little moment to breathe and kind of digest what was going on. And these moments, which are normally edited out of a film or not kept for some reason, are very revealing in a sense for your film in particular. Why was it important for you in the narration to keep these kind of moments of pauses and breaks? Kathleen, maybe you can talk a bit about how you decided who to be with when and how much to linger in what moment.
Yeah, I think there's several reasons why those moments were so important. I think, again, Maya could speak to this better, but I think in the original interaction with this young woman, what wasn't said and the silences in the spaces, held so much weight. And I think that's true for the way that we communicate with each other as human beings, is like most of what we're saying is actually between the words we say. And I think giving the audience, if the audience didn't have time between the words to sort of process what's underneath them, I think you're doing them an injustice. But also in terms of a technical perspective, like those spaces were our editing. Like we had to decide, sort of edit the film before we shot it, edit it in the script stage, so we could decide, okay, when do we slow down? When do we speed up? As you said, who do we go with when? One of the big questions we asked when we were blocking was, whose moment is this? Whose scene is this? And who holds the power? And I think because it's a very subtle script, these shifts in power were so important and so small. So we really had to think about, who's flipping the script at what moment, and who do we stay with? I don't know if you have anything to add to that.
No, that's great.
Yeah, thank you. Moving on to the sound, which is again very natural in your film, adding to this overall realistic feel. Apart from those two incredible songs, I'm going to read out the names just so that I've not got them wrong. One of the songs is Mommy's Little Guy, a lullaby by First Nations artist Fawn Wood. And then there's Little Green by Joni Mitchell. The lullaby has stayed with me. I mean, especially that hum. And I think that scene where Rosie goes into the toilet while she's at the safe house and sings it or hums it to her unborn child is so poignant. Talk to us a bit about, why this sort of keeping with the diegetic sounds of the film was important, and then these two tracks and how they played in also to this idea of motherhood that is an overlying theme in the film.
Sure. Yeah, we were so honored to be able to use both of those songs. The Joni Mitchell song is about her having to give her own baby up for adoption before she became a world famous musician. And as far as we know, it's the first time that song has been licensed for anything. So we were just so honored that we were able to have access to the song in that way. And we'd listened to the album when we were writing one day, and the song came on, and it just felt like it was the right thing to use in our script. And Joni Mitchell herself is also has some Sami heritage, which is quite cool. And she was born in a town that's within my Blackfoot home territory here in Canada. So it was just a wonderful opportunity to be able to use that song that had such significance in terms of those questions of motherhood and the responsibilities that motherhood carries. But in terms of the lullaby by Fawn Wood, we used that song throughout rehearsal as well as a way to sort of ground Violet in the performance. And Kathleen and I had kind of bumped up against some issues in the writing process. Like it felt like there was something missing from the script. And there was one day where we kind of had the realization that we were forgetting that there was a baby that was part of the story. And so that song was kind of a way it felt like it kind of like connected all of those things, because often in stories about teen pregnancy or films about teen pregnancy, there's, questions or conversations of contraceptives and the right to, to choose to have an abortion, all of those things. And those are really important conversations to have. But when it comes to Indigenous motherhood, it's so much more complicated in the sense that because our children have been removed from our communities for so long, and the right to motherhood has been taken away from so many Indigenous women, we wanted to ensure that audiences understood that it was also about Rosie's right to be a mother, that is something that she wants and wants more than anything, and that she was striving to break that cycle of displacement and fracturing from community and family and culture and all of those things. And so in using that song and connecting Rosie to the baby inside of her, it was also a reminder that this film is about her love for that baby and her right to be a mother, and also like a way to encourage audience members to set aside any sort of preconceived notions about who has the right to be a mother and what a good mother even is, or what it means to be a good mother, and also set aside attitudes around class and motherhood as well.
Yeah, you mentioned in your director statement that both of you had, being in your early 30s or late 30s, I'm not sure, but somewhere in your 30s like me as well, had questions about motherhood while writing the script and were, talking about this. So it was a part of your initial research as well. And interesting that you brought it up that the baby was sort of forgotten, but it's a very, very pertinent role, even though unseen in this film, that this baby has. I want to talk about this one particular scene in the film that's also stayed with me, and I think has stayed with a lot of people who've watched the film, is, the power shift in the taxi cab. It's so playful, and it shows the resilience also of Rosie as a character, that there's still humor, even though she's going through this extremely traumatic event. and an extremely potent scene where, you're in a taxi cab going to the safe house, and she sort of flips the script on you, Ayla, by saying that she's taking you to the rehab, and at this point we don't know who is helping who, or the driver also is little confused. Why was this important to use this sort of shift of power? Why was it important in your narration of the film and the story?
Okay, I'll go. I think for exactly the reason you're saying, we wanted to make sure that we were giving Rosie the agency, or at least, give her some power over her own narrative. And in this moment, she, is taking control, and turning the sort of outsider view of the situation onto Ayla as this victim that needs to be cared for. I think it was just important for us to show that she's a full person, and she has humor, and she's smart and cheeky, and a good prankster. And that she does have power, or deserves power, over her own choices and her own life.
Did that happen in reality, Elle-Máijá, when you were taking the lady?
Well, she was really funny, and we wanted to honor that. It sounds so strange to say, but on the drive, because there was no taxi ride in real life, but I drove her to the safe house, and on the drive we laughed, and she told me some funny stories, and she made jokes, and I wanted to honor her resilience and her capacity to laugh in the face of violence in that way. And I think it also just speaks to Indigenous humor in the sense that, I don't know, it's like laughter is it really is medicine. And whenever you go into an Indigenous home, like whenever I'm home, we laugh. That's the most common sound you hear is laughter in the home. And I think that's a really beautiful thing.
I just wanted to tell the participants that Elle-Máijá needs to leave in 10 minutes. So if you have any questions for her, please share them right away. I'm also going to just look in the chat to see if there's anything so that I don't miss it out, all this technology. So there's something here. It says, this message is from KR. This was such an incredible and real film. It is so accurately displayed the varied experiences of these two women. Thank you both for your incredible artistry. I have two questions. I noticed in this story, it showed the unequal exchange of personal experiences between the two women, where Ayla did not disclose she suffered from anxiety or the pain from the IUD procedure. Was this an intentional underlying message? I saw this as really realistic display on the division and inequality between people on an interpersonal level. So that's the first question. Elle-Máijá, do you want to take that?
Sure. Thank you, KR. Yeah, that was all intentional. The film is about kind of also, exploring the collision of class and the options that are available in terms of our agency or sovereignty over our own bodies when it comes to class, and our relationship with healthcare and authority figures shifts when it comes to class, and also race. In Canada, it's been very well documented that Indigenous people have frequently experience racism in the healthcare system, to the extent that many people have died because of lack of access to healthcare, or poor healthcare, or misdiagnosis, or that's often rooted in racial bias or racism towards Indigenous people. And all of that is there to unpack as well, just in terms of Rosie and Isla's very different lived experience and the various forms of privilege, especially that Isla has inherited. So all of that was very present in the decisions that we made about the way that we represented their bodies and their relationship to their own bodies and what they disclosed, and also kind of like the fact that Isla being in this position of power between these two women, I think it's important to acknowledge that in many ways she feels that she has the right to not necessarily exploit, but to know what's going on in Rosie's life, whereas she's not willing to disclose what's going on with her own internal stuff. And so, yeah, I think that's kind of speaks to her own sort of like savior mentality, and how all of that needed to be confronted and dismantled in this 90 minutes that she spends with this woman.
And the other question KR has is also something that I had looked at, is this idea of help and how we look at help. And he or she asks, the whole situation also raised the question on what it means to help and what being helpful actually looks like. What were you hoping to show around this exchange between the two women?
I think, yeah, just that. Just I don't think either of us really had any plans to like conveniently resolve the story, because it wasn't resolved in real life, and I don't think will ever be resolved. And maybe that is our resolution, is just to ask questions and to yeah, just recognize that the support systems that are in place for women who are experiencing intimate partner violence are just not adequate and are overburdened and under-resourced. And so those were kind of things we wanted to bring up, was just the reality that is not simple as just leaving, and also that yeah, the agency of Rosie in particular needs to be respected, and we hope that it could be better understood in telling the story.
Yeah, totally. I think like what came across from your film for me also was that cycles of abuse are not so simple to break free from. And, you know, it, like that lady says from the safe house, it takes 7 to 8 times before something maybe happens or they come to ask for help. So thank you for those questions. And there is one more from Adrian. Good evening to you all. How much room did you leave for improvisation during the shoot, for the acting work? More exactly, everything that we see in the finished film was also in the script, ? Kathleen?
Well, so it was very close to the script, the final film, but of course, because of the way we were filming, improvisation was always a possibility. And there's a few moments in the film that were sort of, you know, happy accidents. Or one moment I could point out is when Rosie can't put on her socks. That wasn't scripted. That was just really, she really couldn't put on those socks. So that sort of turned into this like really touching moment where Isla has to help her. And there's a few other moments. I can't think of more specifics at the moment, but I think there was sort of a balance of the movement and the blocking had to be fairly close every time because of the camera needing to be sort of involved in that. But at the same time, you know, we didn't want it to become stale. So even the cinematographer had to have room for improvisation and to try and find these moments. There's one moment which I really love in the safe house scene where the camera sort of tilts down to Rosie's knees and she's playing with a nacho on her leg. And, you know, obviously that wasn't in the script. She was just doing that. But what's beautiful about that moment is you see the nail polish that she was putting on at the beginning of the film. And so it sort of brings you back. And that was just Norm's instinct to go down at that moment. So yeah, it's sort of a very scripted, but also had these moments.
Thank you. If there are any other questions, just put them in the chat. And Elle-Máijá, I know there's 2 minutes, so I just want to say thank you from all of us for joining us and for this incredible piece of work. And tell us what you're up to. What can we look forward to seeing you in or working on before you head out?
Thank you. Yeah, that was a great conversation. I've been working on a feature-length documentary for 5 years. It's about my Blackfoot community's response to the opioid crisis, or the drug poisoning crisis. And I am so very proud of my community and all of the hard work that's happening there. And the film is a portrait of all of that hard work. And it's actually going to be playing at DocFest Munich in May. I don't know the actual dates, but it'll be at DocFest Munich, so audiences in Germany can see the film. It's called Gimabi-Bitzen, The Meaning of Empathy, and it's a 2-hour-long documentary film. Yeah. Okay, I better jump off. Thanks so much, everybody.
Thank you so much, and good luck.
Bye.
Kathleen, you'll still stay on? I wanted to talk, Kathleen, about the treatment of violence in the film and how, you know, it didn't need to be shown gaudily or depicted overtly in your film. But still, there is this lingering throughout the film, you know, of this the boyfriend and the violence there without having to show it. Was that an intentional decision that you made as writers and directors?
Yeah, I think one of the big things that we were keeping in mind when we were writing this film was that our primary audience, or our target audience, was Indigenous women. That was like our first audience. So every time we made a choice, we had to think about how would that audience feel watching this moment, and what do they need to see? And I think we sort of had to find the balance in terms of what we show, because we still need to understand the violence of what's happening. But I think as women, we don't need a lot of information to understand that. We pick up on very small cues, and I think, you know, any intelligent man would also pick up on these cues. But we just felt like seeing violence on screen is just a way of reinforcing, even if it's not your intention to, it can glamorize it and make it exciting, and we didn't want to do that. So that was why we sort of chose to show it or not show it in the way that we did.
And what are you up to, Kathleen? What are your next projects looking like?
Well, I'm sort of back to square one with writing the next feature. So I can't really say too much about it, but it's another drama that deals with sort of multi-species interconnectivity and trauma again.
Seems like a consistent theme. That
yeah. And motherhood, lots of motherhood films for me.
There's another question from Adrian. He asks, what was the most difficult scene for you from a technical point of view?
The scenes that right off the bat our cinematographer was worried about were the taxi scenes. Getting in and out of the taxis was probably the moments we had to rehearse the most, because of, you know, we actually had to physically have it was actually our producer in the back of the cab, and the cinematographer would hand off the camera while it was still rolling, because we didn't actually have a transition point there. So it was sort of a continuous motion where he gives the camera away, and then the taxi moves off, and then the camera operator gets into the follow van, and we sort of follow to the next location. He jumps out. So it was like a lot to plan out, and just to do that transition in a way that was smooth and seamless was definitely the biggest challenge.
The film has traveled quite a bit. I mean, you got picked up by Array distributors. Are you already on Netflix?
Yes.
Yes, in English-speaking countries, I believe.
Yeah.
When you set out to make the film, what were your intentions, and to see the trajectory of where the film has reached and who it's reached? How does it make you feel as directors of a really, really important topic?
Yeah, I think when we were writing the film, we really weren't sure how it was going to be received. I don't think we thought it would be as widely received as it is. We were pretty sure that women would love it, but we weren't sure how the rest of the world would feel about it. So it was really, it was really wonderful to start in Berlin and sort of get a bit of a taste of how this film speaks to an audience outside of Canada, because a lot of the issues we're speaking to are very deeply rooted in Canadian history and present sort of systems of violence. So we weren't sure how much of that would translate. And we were really happy with the reception. And I think from a sales perspective, we still did struggle a lot to sell this film. There were not a lot of distributors that felt they could market it. So Array coming on was a huge boost to us, and just their knowledge of the market and how to present a film like this and how to support it was really incredible. And yeah, we feel so lucky to be with them.
Yeah, it's really a beautiful film, and I think everyone needs to watch it if they haven't. And I really want to thank you for giving us this opportunity to have your film in the program, for making the film so truly and honestly. It really feels like a body of love and a lot of truth of lived experiences of these two women, and women all over the world that can relate to many things within the film, and finally feel represented on screen and heard on screen. So I hope it's really a shift in cinema, especially in Western cinema, on how Indigenous cultures are represented and seen. So thank you so much for joining us and for taking the time for this conversation. And thank you for all the participants for coming in and your questions. We show another film tomorrow called Debut, and then there's more films on the 17th and a conversation on the 18th. So we hope to see you there. Thanks a lot,
Thank you
Kathleen.
so much.
Yeah.
Thank you, everyone.
Oh, I thought there was another question, but there's just a clap. Thanks, everyone. And thanks to the Oyoun team for all their help. Ciao.
Bye.
Bye.